Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of Coefficient, which is a podcast by TheMathCompany, and I'm your host Nirupama. In this podcast, we will be talking to experts from TheMathCompany about topics related to the present and future of data analytics and AI for business intelligence. So whether you're a business leader who wants to understand how to make your department or your business data-driven, or you're just somebody who's interested in understanding the new trends in this space, or somebody who's starting out a career or want to advance your career in the data analytics and AI space, this podcast is for you. In this first episode, we are talking to Sayandeb Banerjee, who is the co-founder and CEO of TheMathCompany. Almost 7 years ago, Sayan, along with Anuj Krishna and Aditya Kumbakonam, his co-founders, founded this company, and they have driven it from being a bootstrapped startup to a very successful, fastest-growing data analytics firm in this space. So I'm really excited to talk to him in this first episode. Let's get started. Hi, Sayan. Welcome to Coefficient, the first episode of the podcast. Very happy to have you here. So my first question to you, I'll dive straight in, is something I've been really curious about for quite some time. So there is this, very often used but sort of cliched phrase called data is the new oil, right? Like you read it everywhere, you hear it everywhere. I think for a decade, people have been using that now. So I wanted to understand, do you agree with that? Or if you had to come up with a different analogy to explain how important data is for an enterprise, then what would that analogy be?
Yeah, no, I think thanks for asking that question right away. See, data is new oil is probably relevant when this term was coined, right? So 10 years back, 15 years back, right? The role that data played in an enterprise, probably this was a good analogy. But if I look at today, I definitely don't agree with this analogy, and I'll tell you why. Before I go into my own analogy, oil is a scarce commodity, right? People are struggling to figure out where to get oil from. Oil. If I have control on oil, then others are in problem. Data is everywhere today, right? I don't think there is any scarcity of data. If at all, the scarcity is of how do you harness the power of data. Talking of an analogy, I don't know if it is new something, but data is like water. And I'll tell you why I'm saying data is like water. One, kind of data is omnipresent. It is everywhere. That is number one. Number two, just like water, unless water is harnessed properly, unless it is stored, you build your dams and you build your whole irrigation system, water is of no use.
Yeah.
Same happens with data, right? Data is getting generated every millisecond, every moment, every part of our life, there is data getting generated. But unless it is captured, harnessed, stored, cleaned, they are of no use, right? So you see a lot of analogies with water, and I feel if you have to call anything, then probably data is the water. I don't think we can call it the new water. And most importantly, it is as essential to life. Oil is very important. It fuels a lot of things. But without water, you won't survive. I think data is getting very close to that place where without data, now look at any enterprise across the world, any individual human beings across the world, I don't think they survive without data. You look at you and me, kind of without data is a hermit life in a jungle, right? From the time you wake up in the morning, you are using data in some way or the other. You don't even realize.
Right.
So that way, I think it's something omnipresent, something which is very, very important. And that's why I'll call data as the water.
Great. I think we're off to a great start. Next question I have for you is actually, just a bit of curiosity for me to understand. You have been working in data space for, ever since you started, working, right? So, when was the first time you had this realization personally about the power of data?
Well, that's a we have to go back, travel back on time quite a bit. So my background, I'm sure that I have done my masters from Indian Statistical Institute, studied a combination of economics, mathematics, statistics, a bit of computer science. So I have even all the way from my college days, if you will, right? I have worked with data, right, in some way or the other. But obviously, when you are in college, you are more interested in how do you learn these things, don't realize the power of data or anything like that.
Right.
In my first job with G, and this happened in the first few months of my job, I remember we were doing a project of customer segmentation. Now, in today's world, this is plain vanilla. Everybody does that. But I'm talking of 25 years back. So using data to segment your customer base was not as prevalent.
Right.
And we did purely using data. I had no direct exposure to that business. This was a private label credit card business that G used to run. So for one of the portfolios, we did a customer segmentation. We came up with some 6 7 key segments in their customer base, and then when we are presenting it to one of the senior VPs, I remember, of that company, and that person kind of lives and breathes that business, and that person was saying, wow, this is amazing, because I knew that there is a cohort of you know working moms who are using this card every weekend to buy this, but I never saw any validation.
Right.
And now that I have validation, I'll go ahead and create a whole campaign and design a whole campaign to target that particular segment. I think, and this was very very early days, and that you're talking about a large brand who is talking about changing their strategy to target certain audience using the work that I'm doing using data. So I think if I reflect back, I think that's probably the first time it started clicking that data can make a lot of difference. And then the rest is history. Over time, had many many different opportunities where clearly saw impact of data in making a difference, particularly in the enterprise world.
That's a great origin story, if I may call it that. So next, I wanted to, talk about how businesses, started using data. Like I have learned when I was in masters. I had a research methodology class, and there was this very interesting story. I will not delve deep into the story, but there's very interesting story about this one guy called John Snow, who was the reason why people figured out that cholera is actually caused due to, it's waterborne disease and not just, because of bad air, which is what people used to believe at that time. And that he did because he just plotted the houses of the people who were infected on a map of London. And he figured out the pipelines, water pipelines were sort of, the pattern he figured out, and that's how he got to it. So that was like my moment, like realizing how important data is, and this is in a society context, right? So in a business context, have businesses always been using data to some extent or the other to make business decisions, or were there some sort of key moments in history where like a company did this, and that was like a pioneering moment?
I think in general, I don't know of, or whatever I have studied and I have understood, I don't think there is one pivotal moment that this is the time that people started using data. In fact, you gave a great example. I'll go back many many more years and talk about cavemen, when we used to kind of stay, when this human race has not even evolved into what it is today. And there is enough research that says that all those cave paintings that you kind of look at is not always just painting. There is a lot of data that is getting recorded there.
Oh, okay.
And this could be data about the moon cycles, right? There is kind of, this is the time when then you have high tide, you have low tide. How do people kind of keep those counts and use that data for their actual living, right? Because based on the tide cycle, so much can change in those days, right? Their whole thing. And those records were actually kept using the drawings on the caves. There is some good amount of research. I think you can look at that. So again, this is not a classic enterprise example, but the point I'm saying is that from that time onwards, human beings have been using data in different ways, right? And the example that you gave is great. There are definitely some watershed moments for sure. One watershed moment is when computer or computing came into being, right? That's the first time where data started to be, we can start storing data and leverage data. The whole thing around the Turing machine and how it deciphered the enigma, the code, and all of these. What is happening? It's all data patterns that, but the ability to run that many iterations and not just what we are doing in our mind, definitely is a shift in terms of using data. Because even if there is intent to use data, unless you have abilities to use something like at least a good calculator or a computer, even in your mind there is only certain things that you can do.
Right.
So the invention of computer is one good pivotal moment. Another one is this just the start of database. I'm talking about early 70s, late 60s, Oracle. Oracle, kind of revolutionized the use of data, because that's probably one of the earlier instances where database, the whole concept of database came into being, right? And we all know that, the data is useful when we start storing data, look at historical trends, because the data which is available right now only gives you a certain story. The history is important, right?
Yeah.
What happens before is important. So that is another, very important moment. And then obviously this whole internet,
Yeah.
right? I mean, when, kind of things started getting connected, right? The World Wide Web, as we call it. That's another big watershed moment, because now you not only can use your own data, you have access to others' data in some way or the other, right? That's another big. So there are some watershed moments, right? Some moments where the velocity or the way the data is being used obviously grew leaps and bounds, but it's still a very kind of a incremental kind of a line, with some blips, but it's not like it was going straight and suddenly went up and then
Right.
it went. So there is no one really magical moment, but there are definitely events that made a big impact in use of data.
Right. So now we'll get to the main topic of the conversation. So the topic we're talking about today is what it means to be a truly data-driven business,
Sure.
right? So to get started on that conversation, could you describe to me what a truly data-driven business would be? Like, if you could describe it.
Sure. Look, I will give you my interpretation of what I understand and what I think a lot of people that I talk to understand as a truly data-driven organization.
Right.
A truly data-driven organization is one. I'll first use a simple definition, and then we'll break it down to see what that means. This is an organization who is using data or evidence to make every single decision that they need to make. Okay, so now let me break it down, right? So if you look at any enterprise, any business, right, there is a external facing side of the business.
Yeah.
If there is a manufacturing company, they are manufacturing certain products, certain goods, and then they are selling it to the market. Use of data on the external side, I think, is now still pretty well established, that how many units do I need to produce, who are typically my buyers, what price do I kind of sell it at. Use data for making those decisions. There also, there are different levels of maturity. There are some who are right up there, some not there. But I think what is more critical for an organization to become truly data driven is when we look at internal processes, internal decision making, and use data for that. So what I mean by that, the number of people or different kind of resources that are needed by an organization is determined by kind of data and data trends and data patterns. Individual productivity is determined by looking at data and figuring out where I'm very productive, where I'm not productive, right? Operational efficiency, which is very internal focused. Understanding human performance, who is doing great, who is not. So every of those small big decisions, if they are driven by data, and I call it evidence, kind of when you say data, there's a lot of questions. There is at least some evidence that because ABC happened, therefore this will happen. That's when an organization becomes truly data driven, and And therefore, the way, if you now look at that organization from outside, if you have a bird's eye view, you will see that every interaction that is happening within that organization, as well as when the organization is interacting with the outside world, so all external interactions and all internal interactions, there is a data component in that conversation. That there is a data which is, think of this as a blackboard behind, where the data is being projected and the conversation is happening in the context of that data. And this is all internal, one-on-one, one-on-many, different kind of conversations, as well as external, both. And I started by saying that while there are many today who has matured on the external side to be leveraging data, leveraging it for internal, kind of purpose is something which only few does and does well, and that's what a truly data-driven organization is.
Right. Now that we've set this context, I want to go and delve a little deeper into this. So to me, it's obvious that a company doesn't, directly go from being, let's say, data ignorant to being data driven in one day, right? So are there any recognizable stages or phases, in which like a company, goes through this journey?
Sure. See, there are many ways to, and first of all, you're right? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. Some travels through that journey much faster, and some takes much longer, and it depends on 100 different factors, right? One very popular way of breaking down these phases is what kind of has been practiced for some time, which is called, there are 4 phases to it, right? So today I'm data ignorant, I'm not leveraging data. The first step is to say that, can I use data to see what happened? So use data as just a rear view mirror.
Right.
Okay. So I'm an enterprise, so I'm driving a car, right? Think of this as a driving the car. Can I at least see, kind of what I have, what I have crossed, what I have left behind? This is what is called the descriptive phase.
Right.
The next level of, again, evolution, and you'll see that there is a natural kind of a progress when an organization. So there are many organizations even today who does a lot of good descriptive work, right? And probably they have not made progress beyond descriptive as much as they aspire to. The second big question is what is called inquisitive. Inquisitive is nothing but why something happened.
Right.
So while I am kind of driving through the rear view mirror, I'm seeing that I have crossed this milestone, I've done this, but I also realize that I have slowed down for the last 1 hour while I'm driving. Now the question that why have I slowed down? Is it because the road conditions are bad, or because I am a little fatigued, so I'm not driving it right? So in the business world, right? I mean, I have run these 3 campaigns. I know in the descriptive side how they have performed. But on the inquisitive side, you start now talking about why something happened, root cause, right? Again, this may sound very simplistic and very, very easy going and fundamental, but believe me, it doesn't happen that easily, right? So that's one big leap. Because now people are saying that, okay, I'm trying to learn something from data so that I can make my decision better. The next step is where, kind of we call it predictive. So DI and then P. There are 2 P's in that framework, right? The first one is predictive. Predictive is I've learned what has happened. I've figured out why something has happened. But now a very important question, what will happen next? So I'm not just driving and figuring out what I have left behind and why I have slowed down. Question is, will I completely stop in the next few minutes? Well, will the car just come to a crashing halt? Or will things change and I will, so predicting what will happen in the future by using all the knowledge of, and by the way, these are all incremental. So just because somebody is inquisitive doesn't mean that I don't need descriptive. Descriptive becomes a fundamental, the baseline, right? So then you build inquisitive on that. And now you build something on top of that, right? Which is predictive. That's where I think in one way it also starts becoming a little more data driven, because I've not only learned what has happened, but I'm trying to predict what will happen tomorrow. What my demand for my product will be. not what it has been in the past, what it will be based on macroeconomic scenarios, what competitors are doing, my pricing strategy, so many different things, right? So what will happen tomorrow is a very important question that needs to get answered. That's called predictive. And then finally, what they call as prescriptive is that, so what? Now that you have learned what has happened, why something happened, what will happen tomorrow, what are you going to do about it? Because that's what I'm saying, that when and what you're going to do about it is the decision making part of it.
Yeah.
And that's really at least some way, the nirvana, where kind of I'm figuring out, or I'm deciding on what decision to make based on what I've learned from data, what has happened, why something has happened. So this is one way to look at an evolution of a company or an enterprise from being data ignorant to really leveraging data and being data driven, if you will, right, to some extent.
Right. Thank you for taking me through that, and all the listeners through that. Another thing that I can sort of guess from what you have shared is, as far as I can see, there seem to be two paths to take in this journey. One is you work with experts, external experts who will do this for you. Or the other is you invest in these capabilities.
Sure.
And in the personnel and like whatever else infrastructure, so that you can do it yourself. How does a company decide which path to take?
So it's a great question. I'm sure I will say something which some will agree with, some will not agree with, but that's how that's how the world is. But I'll only talk about what I have seen over this last 25 years, what my experience has been.
Right.
First thing first, I don't think it's a question of either or.
Okay.
I think there is an English word, a three-letter word called and, which is very, very powerful, as they call the power of and, right? So it is about building internal capabilities, becoming more and more self-sufficient, and leveraging partners for very specific purpose. And but let me illustrate that a little more. I think, in my experience, what I have seen is organizations, go through this journey. So when they start, and I just described when somebody becomes from a data ignorant, they start doing descriptive work and inquisitive work. I think initially, and naturally so, there is a dependence on a partner to do this, to bring this, kind of insights to the table, to bring this ability to the table. Because a partner who has been doing this, leveraging data, understand that industry dynamics, right? So they come in. As we get more and more matured and we go through that cycle, descriptive, inquisitive, slowly becoming predictive, what I have seen is, there is an increasing realization that, hey, while I am working with the partner, I'm not building any IP on my own, right? So you see there is a shift, slowly there is a shift from dependence to independence, that I'll be independent, right? Which is great, and I strongly believe that any enterprise need to have certain amount of independence and self-sufficiency as far as data and data related abilities are concerned. Because I said in the beginning, this is like water.
Yeah.
You have to figure out how to harness water yourself. You cannot be dependent on the canned waters coming to you and you just drinking that bottled water. You have to figure out ways to clean water, to kind of how to use this better, right? So it is very important in the journey of an enterprise. However, I think as they become even more mature, you'll see that from dependence to independence, it start becoming an interdependent relationship. Okay. So what that means is that I definitely want to have my independence, but I'm talking from an enterprise standpoint. But I am kind of smart enough to know where to leverage a partner. So I am dependent on them on certain aspects. The partners are obviously dependent on me to kind of increase their ability. So there's a relationship of interdependence that also starts growing, and this can be in many different areas. See, there are newer areas that an enterprise want to kind of explore, right, with data. Typically that journey starts with a partner, because who knows that how successful that would be, that I'm exploring a new way of looking at customer acquisition, leveraging data, right? So that I will try for a bit, but unless you have tried that enough and you see success, you don't want to build your own capabilities, because you don't know that in 6 months, 9 months, a year's time, maybe you have to change track. So that's one area that I've seen people leveraging. There are newer capabilities that are today, at least if one thing which is constant is people talk about is change is the only constant, right? So with that, change means that there is newer technology, there is new methodology, there are new ways of looking at data, leveraging data to make decisions in a very different way. Enterprises are again kind of very 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 cognizant of the fact that all of that cannot happen internally, no matter how much I invest in research and development, because at the end of the day, data is not their business. Their business is still production of a certain commodity, or kind of providing a certain service, right? Or running a bank, or running an insurance company. So that newer capabilities and newer things has to come from outside. So there are few kind of very established ways in which I have seen, as organizations go through that maturity, they use the power of and, that they build. And I and we in the Math Company has been a big believer that organizations needs to have certain amount of self-sufficiency. Then only there could be a very healthy engagement and a relationship with an external partner. Otherwise, there will always be a little bit of that mistrust, that I'm 100% dependent on that, and there is a fear that what am I missing out on. So that way, I have honestly advised many of our clients that, like, I don't think you have the right internal capability today. Why don't you also build your internal capability while we work with you to solve problems ABC?
Okay. So just like I just want to branch off and ask a follow-up question from that. To a listener, I'm a little curious, right? As a company that provides these kind of services, encouraging your clients to become self-sufficient, isn't that counterintuitive?
No, it is not counterintuitive, and I'll tell you why. I think it is counterintuitive if you come from the fundamental belief that there is a finite amount of problems that needs to get solved.
Okay.
And if I am helping kind of my clients or these enterprises to become self-sufficient in solving those problems, then there is nothing left for me to do, right? It is coming from that fundamental hypothesis. The reality in the world today is that demand for solving problems using data far outweighs than any supply that you can think of. So even if an organization build their internal capabilities, they can only kind of cover only a certain percentage of those problems that are out there. And by the way, this is, I'm talking about identified demand, I mean known problems. There is a lot of latent problems or latent demand that we have not even explored. So that needs to be explored in my mind, and that for that there will be a role for kind of a partner like ours to work alongside our enterprises to explore that. On the contrary, if I encourage them to become more self-sufficient, I think the relationship becomes very healthy, because the client knows that we are not here to charge what is typically called an economic rent. It's not that I'm here to do the same exercise again and again and not kind of let them take benefit of the IP that is created. So I think there is a tremendous amount of trust that gets built in that approach. And as I told you, right, and this will be the case in the near foreseeable future, that the number of problems that needs to get solved, the demand far outweighs any form of supply.
Right.
So I don't think we need to worry about that. And that's the macro overall picture. Now there may be small pockets where this may not work out, but so be it, right? I mean that's the overall philosophy with which we are building the Math Company.